Welcome back to another episode of the Industrious Podcast. Thank you guys all for joining us from wherever you get your podcasts. If you happen to be tuning in on the Assessa YouTube channel, thank you for doing so. And just real quick, if you haven't already done so, hit the little subscribe button or that notification bell icon so you can be alerted when new episodes like this one drop. We would appreciate it. It doesn't cost you a single dime. All right, big episode today, folks. Longtime media vet here in Central Indiana, Mr. Gerry Dick. Gerry, welcome to the Industrious Podcast.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation.
Oh, thanks for joining us. Why don't you have a pretty storied past, so I'll let you kind of do your own intro for those that may not be familiar. But if you would, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Yep, native Hoosier. Grew up in a little town, Clinton, Indiana, which is about 15 miles north of Terre Haute, Vermilion County, Indiana. So small town, really a great place to grow up, and ended up, I wanted to be a high school basketball coach. That's what I thought I was going to be. And played sports in high school, 3 sports, baseball, basketball, and football. My junior year, we were undefeated. It was right at the beginning of the playoffs. I think it might have been the second year, 1970, 74. We were undefeated, and back then there were 3 classes in football, and you got bonus points if you beat a school larger than you, a AAA.
Okay. Yep.
But you got points taken away if you beat a smaller school. And it was one of those years. The class ahead of me was just really good. Really, really good. It was one of those years you get sometimes in a small town, and we had a great team, and we were undefeated and didn't make the playoffs. We beat Terre Haute South, the AAA team. We beat them 25-0.
Okay.
And had 2 touchdowns called back. So we had a good team. But
you remember that pretty soon.
I do. Yeah, I could probably go play by play.
I feel like there's a little bit of a wound still existing about those 2 touchdowns.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. But love sports, do to this day, certainly. But that was a big part of my childhood growing up. They don't give Division III scholarships, but got money to play football and baseball at DePaul.
Okay.
In Greencastle. Got mono when I was there before my freshman year football camp, and got reaction to the mono. Went into the hospital, got packed with ice. I mean, I was really sick. Got started in school like 3 weeks late. I should have laid out, didn't lay out, and that first semester was awful. My whole experience, my fault, was terrible at DePaul. But you know how things work out. Ended up transferring to Indiana State, and that's how I got into. Well, first of all, determined I didn't want to be a high school basketball coach anymore. I was doing an internship, West Vigo High School. We were playing Terre Haute North, the big rival, much bigger school. They didn't have a 3-point line back then. Mm-hmm. We're ahead by 3 points with 1 second to go. They had the ball underneath their own basket. Okay, we're up by 3. Our coach calls timeout. Tells these guys, look, guys, they've got the ball. Let them score. Just let them, catch the ball, throw. There's 2 points. Buzzer sounds. We win by 1.
Right.
Couldn't have been more clear. So you know what happened. They threw the ball in. Our guy fouled the guy. Went to overtime. We ended up winning the game. But I thought that night, there's no way I want my paycheck dependent upon that.
Right.
And then just kind of stumbled into television, actually, when I was over there. They have a good radio and TV program at Indiana State.
Okay.
But importantly, had 3 TV stations. And I would work for nothing. I mean, I did get paid one doing the weekend weather, believe it or not, in Terre Haute as a college student. So got tremendous amount of experience there. And first job out of school was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, reporter at the NBC station. ABC station there recruited me about a year and a half later in Channel 6 here in Indy in 1983, late 83. Moved here in 83. So
yeah. So was that basketball experience what really kind of shifted your, intentions of what you wanted to do in terms of and what was it about broadcasting that may have triggered that?
It's funny. I don't know. I always enjoyed communications. Classes and that kind of thing. Well, I was doing an internship. I said, well, I'll try this out. They had an internship at Channel 38, which was the ABC station at the time in Terre Haute. the blizzard of '78. So I'm working that day, and the storm hits, and we're stuck there, and people can't get in. Little college student, they actually put me on the air reading closings, that night.
Right.
I didn't know what the H I was doing, but I did it, and I could not believe later, because everybody was snowbound, so people were watching TV. I mean, all these people, I saw you on TV. That was really,
Right.
I thought, well, that's kind of intriguing, and it was that initial experience, and as I got a little bit more into it, really like the news piece, the news element of broadcasting, and got going. I would get up at 4 a.m. and walk to a radio station, do cut-ins on a rock station in Terre Haute. Some of these things I didn't get paid for. I just did it for the experience. And it was really a great time. As I said, Larry Bird, he was there in Terre Haute at that time, so we had a great amount of fun watching basketball and having fun at the local campus establishments, and
Right.
So it was fun.
Nice. Library.
Yes, the
Right.
library, exactly.
Every now and then the bookstore.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Those are two establishments.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And they're on campus.
Yeah, on campus too.
There
yes.
you go.
So, born and raised Clinton, matriculated to Indiana State. You jump into your professional career, which you've now found a avenue to broadcast journalism, and you fast forward through your stints in smaller markets. You land in Indy. What caused you to set roots here?
Yeah, great question, because I think it's a story that is probably replicated many times. So, I get out of college and boom, I'm going to go to Chicago. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. You had this whole, idea of where you wanted to go, and I had a job offer in Nashville, Tennessee, which I was fortunate because by doing all of these jobs in college, I had so much more experience than anybody my age. So that prompted A, stations to look at me, and then B, if I went in and did the interview and stuff, I had an opportunity to get a job. So got an offer in Nashville, and that didn't pan out. But my anticipation was to get to Chicago, and then an opportunity. A good buddy of mine had left the station I was at, came to Indianapolis as a producer, and there was an opening, and he recommended me to the news director, and ended up getting the job here. And like so many people in so many industries, once you get here, Indy in this area is just such a great area. So, and I always liked Indianapolis, and I thought, maybe one day after I've gone to some of these other bigger markets, I'd come back here and settle down. But got here, we had our first child in '84, so just a few months after we got here, and the rest is history. So it's such a great city. There was so much going on. Channel 6, at the time, was the dominant station. They were for so many years. And so worked with just great people at Channel 6, great broadcasters, great people. So it was just fun all the way around.
Yeah. What was your first role at WRTV?
They called it field anchor, which was you would be out in the field somewhere live basically every night. So, and this is back when they would give people time to do stories, which they don't now. I mean, it's just, quick.
Right.
But I would say, for example, General Motors strike. I'd go to be in Anderson. During the day, I'd put together, probably a 3 or 4 minute story, which is unheard of today. And then they would throw it to me with kind of the big story of the night out in the field. So field anchor was my kind of my first job, and really had that job doing stories out in the field. And to the extent that we did stories around the state, we'd go do those stories too. Mm-hmm. So I was fortunate because over the 13 or so years I was at Channel 6, I was able to develop a lot of really good relationships and contacts and institutional knowledge of cities and towns, really in every corner of the state.
Right, which, lo and behold, was a good building block for the next move.
Without question.
Yeah, so you answered one of my questions, was you were at Channel 6 for 13 years. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the transition. Mm-hmm. I guess what occurred to make you even consider doing that, and then ultimately what was the deciding factor to make that decision to leave and start your own thing?
Enjoyed what I was doing. Enjoyed, again, Channel 6, the people, everything about it. But as I looked at it, and I could see, television news becoming a different animal in terms of the kinds of stories you covered, the amount of depth. Television's never been a real deep reporting deal. But I mean, back in 83, 84, 85, they would give you time to do stories. You could get into stories and do your job. I just felt as though it was going the path that almost a robot could do it. You know what I mean? And maybe with AI, maybe that's going to happen, unfortunately, pretty soon. But I could see that happening. And as much as I liked doing what I was doing at the time, I said, I don't want to wake up in 10 years or 15 years and decide that I want to do something else. Yeah. And at that time, if I wait 10 years, it'll be too late. You know what I mean? I'll be so far down the road. So I thought, what could I do? Well, the natural progression is to go from television to a corporate communications job. Okay. Lilly or Roche, whatever the case might be. So Guidant was a company. It was part of Lilly at I think at that point, or I don't know if they'd spun out at that point. But anyway, I had started with Guidant, and there was an opportunity at Lilly, and this would have been in around 95, and I got an offer to go there. And I said, well, you know what? That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get out of TV and go down this corporate communications path. Well, back then there was a CEO who wasn't there a long time, Von Bryson, I remember, and it was a tumultuous time at Lilly, which was so unusual because they're so close to the vest, and you never hear anything bad there. Well, they had basically a coup. I think it was a Friday. They called it Black Friday, and the CEO was ousted, several people, just total upheaval. Everything kind of, was up for grabs. So bottom line, that job offer that I expected to get and was told I was going to get was off the table. And I was devastated. I was so disappointed. I'm like, my God. I was all set. Mindset was, that's what I'm going to do. And all of a sudden it was gone. So rather than although I did feel sorry for myself for a while, but rather than dwell on it, I said, well, what am I going to do? What do I know? I know broadcasting. I know Indiana. I know people. I have contacts, business news. I have, some wherewithal there. And what if I created a business show, which is not an unusual, it's not a unique idea. Many people had tried before, but my thought was, at that time, and it's certainly still the case, you could get national business news a million different places on cable, and certainly it's that way today. But where do you go to get local business news? We see what's happening then, and certainly has continued here in terms of business news coverage, in newspapers. And certainly local TV has never done a great job of covering business news, but now it's an afterthought. So where do you go to get local news? And I thought, okay, why did business shows in the past fail? And to me, it was one of two things. You either had a guy who's got the money to do it, but he didn't know TV. So it's a chamber of commerce type, hey, we need to do business news, but had no idea how to do TV. Or a guy like me who knew how to do TV, but didn't have money, to do it. How do you marry the two? And that was, kind of the spark. I just thought, if I could get this thing on the air, it would be successful. I really felt that it would. So I just made a little flip chart, about 6 or 8 pages, went to a very small number of people. John Mutz, who was, he'd left, he was post-lieutenant governor role, but very prominent business person, and John Merlin, who was at the chamber for years, and I think 2 others. And I just say, hey, would you give me 30 minutes? Just want to talk to you about that. To a person, they were absolutely. Kind of went through this deal, told them what I was thinking about, and to a person, they were like, absolutely, it's something that can work. Yeah. And we would help you, if you needed it. And then the kind of the seminal moment, and I always laugh about this, but It had progressed. I was working at Channel 6 still, and I said, well, we need to get some dollars, some sponsorship dollars. And went down to the IU School of Business. It was not Kelly yet. Mm-hmm. And, met with the dean, Dan Dalton, big guy. He was new. I had not met him, but I just thought, I do a lot with school. They would seem to be a natural. They had just gotten the check for $23 million or whatever it was for the Kelly School of Business. So I give this thing to Dan Dalton. He looks at it, has a couple questions. He just kind of shoved it back and said, yeah, I think we'll do that. And I was like, and I'll never forget, I walked outside and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do now? It was a fall day. The wind hit me, beautiful fall, late morning, hit me in the face. And I'm like, what am I going to do? I got to do it now. And that was the start of the show that we got on the air. It was really unique and interesting how it happened, and to be able to get it both on commercial. We were on Channel 6 and Channel 20, so we were in both public, and which is very unusual. But doing it that way allowed us to pool resources and to get it on and to make it happen. And then the next big hurdle, I got to thinking about it, we were on the air for a year, and it was going pretty well. It was getting a lot of traction, and we're getting some sponsors. And the relationship, the deal I had with Channel 6, I said, look, you can give me just a modest talent fee, but then give me a percentage of the revenue that comes in.
Okay.
That way, if this doesn't work, no bad. we can both walk away. Well, it was going very well. Met with the GM, and he was, pleading poverty and all that kind of stuff, which is not unusual. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, no talent fee. Don't give me a talent fee, but give me whatever it was, a 5% or 10% increase in the percentage. He agreed to it, and we got it rolling, and the dollars kept coming in. And then it hit me, now wait a minute. I came up with this idea. I've done all the work. Whose show is it? Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say it's mine.
Right.
But legally, I'm saying, Channel 6, they can just say, hey, screw you, buddy. This is our show. It airs on our station.
Right.
So I thought, gosh, I've got to come up with a plan that I get ownership of the show. Yeah. And, sometimes, and cut me off.
No, you're good. This reminded me of Mrs. Jordan, Michael Jordan's mother.
Yeah.
Negotiating with Nike.
Yeah. And so just by happenstance, I went up and got a meeting with Scott Jones, technology entrepreneur at the time, and just about a tech segment sponsorship. And he said, I've seen the show. I think there's a real opportunity here. And this was really at the onset of, the internet. It was really in its early days. And he said, why don't you come up with an idea to make the show a statewide show, not just Indianapolis, but make it statewide. And then also, bring in other elements of media, radio, newsletters, whatever the case might be. Obviously, a website.
The predecessor of driving, the phrase they have, driving content, creating and building content.
Totally. And getting it to people, as we used to say, when they want it, where they want it, how they want it. Whether maybe it's just TV, maybe it's TV, radio, maybe it's everything, whatever. And so I came up with a plan, a model to do it, and it took about 6 months or so, and we agreed that I would bring the intellectual property to the table. Scott would invest the money. We created Grow Indiana Media Ventures in 2000, so 23 years ago. And we started with 2 stations, Channel 6, Channel 20, and then and that was it. We launched a website, and then we kind of dabbled and got into TV, and just it was doing things we didn't know what we didn't know, and we'd try things and do some things wouldn't work, other things would work, and we'd lead us to the next thing. So that just kind of started that process, and then over time we got up to 14 stations, commercial and public on the TV side, 23, 24 stations on radio, doing it every day. And we didn't have the equipment to do radio, so I would drive down to WIBC every morning at 7 a.m. and we'd go in a studio and tape the deal, and they'd air it. And so anyway.
So to drill down a little bit
Yeah.
on the entrepreneurial aspect of this, and you touched on this a little bit, talking sponsorships and talking, sort of the ad share and things like that. But when in your world, in the world of media and journalism, how you say, I have this idea, but you mentioned I needed money. So how did you raise the capital, or what avenue did you take for someone to sort of front load that cost to get it up and running? And then further, how do you monetize that business model? Obviously, you touched on advertisements and sponsorships, but if you could speak a little bit in kind of nuts and bolts on that, because the people that do listen to the podcast, obviously a lot of them being business backgrounds, talking shop. Journalism and media is certainly it's a different animal than a lot of it.
Yeah. And what I did, initially, would put the show together, and it would air on Channel 6. Channel 20, we gave them the show. We just gave it to them, and they could air it. They could do underwriting, that kind of thing. So in exchange for production services, so we were trading everything out, trying to make it work financially. That's how we did that. But on Channel 6, it was just a matter of they were selling and I was selling. Both of us were selling, and whatever the pot ended up being, that percentage came to us. So we had a product, and they would sell it just like they'd sell, Oprah or whatever the case might be, and got the revenue going.
What
there.
prompted them to say, yes, we want to create airtime for your show?
Yeah, great question. Because and I think the bottom line, like anything else, it was money. I mean, you could say, hey, it was a great show. They wanted to have a great show. Maybe a little bit, but it was money. And they saw, and I think I persuaded them, especially after IU came to the table with a big headline sponsorship. They said, okay, that's interesting. We could have a business show, a credible business show that makes us look good and all that, but we could drive, we get money. So that's what we did. Then when we went out on our own and created the company, we would buy the time from Channel 6 to start out with. Okay. And then we had the ability to sell all within that hour and to make our money. So we had to make more money, obviously, than revenue-wise, than what it cost us to buy the time.
You wanted more coming in than you did going out.
Exactly. Yes.
Novel,
very good strategy. But and then as we began to franchise around the state, if you will, ABC station in Fort Wayne and some of the other ones, we would give them the show, and there are 20 spots in the show. We keep 10 of them, so we can create a statewide network, if you will. They get 10 of them so they can sell on their own. And we don't have to put a salesperson in Fort Wayne or Northeast Indiana. They're doing that up there. But it's really about, positioning and then the other piece, the internet, the radio, all the things we were doing. It was great for content distribution, but also great for ad sales, because you could say, okay, you could do a hybrid. Okay, we'll do TV. You could do a little radio too, or hey, you could do the newsletter, or maybe you don't do it. Maybe you do the newsletter and radio. So you gave people options, and that
much bigger reach
too.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think back to those early days, because as you can imagine, in 2000, the internet was a different place, and quality-wise, we had how many times our video, because we would digitize video every week, because we wanted to create this brand that, hey, this is where it's going, and we're going to be there. And it was tough to watch because it would freeze up, every 20 seconds and that kind of thing. But
the dial-up modem had a little trouble.
Oh yeah, exactly, yeah, but we got through that, and technology evolved, and it all worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's been 20 plus years of the current venture being your thing. Historical trends in that time period, and I know that there could be a lot of options to choose from here, but what have been some of the biggest changes that you've seen, or biggest shifts that you've seen in Central Indiana and or the state of Indiana in terms of business and how people do business in that time period?
Technology certainly is a huge driver. Technology has enabled us to do what we do. Without advances in technology, radio is an example. It used to be that if you want to do a radio report or a program, you would have to, you have to get an ISDN line. You'd have to invest in all this technology, and very expensive to do it. Now, and it's been this way for a long, long time, you have a software program that we can do at home, and we do it at home, do it wherever, office, home. You do it, you edit it. I'm sure like probably the podcast here is a good example as well. And then you just put it up on a site, and folks go out and get it. Done. Easy. We would never be able to do that. Would not have been able to do it 20 years ago. TV. It's hard to believe that we can send a 30-minute, it used to be an hour, but a 30-minute 4K quality broadcast, video on the internet to stations, where it used to be you had to buy satellite time.
Okay.
Very expensive. So, if we wanted to get the show in Northwest Indiana and South Bend and Fort Wayne, Evansville, and all those places, put it up on a bird. And it was not cheap. Now we literally put it on an FTP site. It takes a while to download, but the quality is there, and it's good. I think from a overall business standpoint, I think here in Indiana, I think it's been interesting to watch things evolve. 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago, that was right we started the show right when the kind of the tech movement was getting going here, and it's funny to look back on that, because some of the things they talked about that Indiana needed to get connected, needed to get more, nonstop flights, need more venture capital, need more, need daylight saving time, right. That whole thing, and so many of those things have happened. And I think, Indiana has always been a conservative state and conservative mind in terms of not big risk takers. I think and we haven't, even though we have all these great entrepreneurs over the many, many decades, Cook and Lilly and Hillenbrand, and, you can go on down the list, but we haven't supported entrepreneurs, I don't think, as we should, and maybe it's a Midwest thing. You start a job, you create an idea, you fail, and you're looked at as a failure. Whereas in California and some of these other markets, it's almost a badge of honor. What are you going to do next?
Right.
Been a lot of people trying to change that, and I think they're having some success. I think the other piece, and this isn't a direct business thing, but this whole, it is a direct deal, I guess, but talent, and how Indiana has got to figure a way to not only keep people here, but we've got to attract people who want to live here.
Yeah.
And with these statewide Ready 2.0 funds that just got approved, communities all over the state are doing some really cool things to improve quality of life, which used to be looked at as this quality of life. Who cares? It's a big deal in economic development, and I think that's a big thing going forward. We've got our tax climate here, I think is generally speaking, pretty highly regarded from a business standpoint. It's just we've got to get the people who want to live here.
Yeah, we've been talking about the brain drain for years, as long as I can remember. But I think some of our mutual recent conversations with people like Elaine Beadle and some of the things that she's working on,
right?
Just another effort by the state to try to retain people, not just from the colleges here, universities and state, but then also attracting people from other states into Indiana, which I think you've seen a migration from Illinois, you've seen a migration from other places. It's starting to happen.
Yeah, in a number of ways, and I think it's interesting. I saw a stat one time that Indiana is top 5, I think, in terms of attracting people from outside of the state to go to college here. Yeah. But if you look at how many stay here, we're like bottom 5 or bottom 10, whatever it is, they all leave. Yeah. And you're seeing people, Northwest Indiana, you mentioned Illinois, and I mentioned the tax climate, fiscal health of the state, which are all positive things now. And you look at a very different picture in Illinois. If you go to Northwest Indiana, which has struggled for so long and had so many issues, now this extension of the South Shore rail line and the double tracking up there to knock off like 35 minutes of travel time from Northwest Indiana to downtown Chicago, they're getting people to move from Chicago. People who work in downtown Chicago, they don't want to live over there. They'll come over to Valpo or Whiting or some of these areas where they've built some nice subdivisions, invested in their downtowns, and the quality of life is good. So you're starting to see it around the state. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah.
That regions
I wonder
are
then
starting
if
to-
also the pandemic hasn't, not strategically, but helped in that, okay, Gary, you would normally have to go to downtown Chicago 5 days a week. Now you may only have to go three
Right.
times a week.
Right.
It's more incentive to even look.
No question. And there's an initiative, and it's got a name, I can't remember what it is, but to attract these remote workers to live here. Maybe
Right.
they work in, we interviewed one from Orlando, Florida. That's where they worked. But they could work from anywhere. So with this program, and they're giving communities incentives to attract those workers and to get them to move here. And so there's another opportunity there, yeah.
Well, I'll ask you, so you brought up our prior episode with Elaine Beadle, which I wanted to ask you, without getting into politics or religion or all the other taboo topics out there, we asked her this same question, and to her credit, she gave a very fair and reasonable answer, considering she could have been very, call it PC about it because of her position.
Right.
But when you look at the state of Indiana, and you mentioned that stat of people coming in for education, especially higher education, but then not being able to retain those folks, what is it about? What are some of the issues that Indiana needs to probably focus on and figure out to not only retain young adults to set up shop in Indiana, both from their raising their families, if they should choose to do that, but also their businesses, but being more welcoming of business expansion into our state? What are some of the top things that, from your perspective and your exposure?
Yeah, certainly to me, and I always, never want to dive into this, but the RFRA, the religious controversy that was, and you have people on both sides saying it wasn't that big a deal. I've talked to numerous people who said it really was a big deal, just from a perception standpoint. Out there. So those social issues, and if you look at a guy like a former governor like Mitch Daniels, he, I think, intentionally stayed away from, just diving into those social issues. But that is, to me, kind of an unforced error, maybe, in some of those social issues that get the attention, right or wrong, that it tends to shine a negative light on the state. So that's one thing. But I think, and I think you go back to the Daniels governorship and that focus on, as he used to say, building the best sandbox, possible for business and people to play in, if you will. And I think that attention to the tax structure, quality of life, and then making it a place, it has amazed me the number of CEOs and others that I've talked to who've moved here, who talk about other states and how it's almost like they're anti-business. I mean, I can't imagine why a state would be anti-business. Right. But he said, no, it's unbelievable. He said, what Indiana has created here is an environment where they want you to be successful, and you feel it. And I think that's been a big deal. I think it's Governing Magazine. You have all these polls and best states for business. CNBC does it. Some are more, I think, germane than others, but I'm probably getting it wrong. Governing Magazine does one, I think, every other year where they poll 350 CEOs or whatever, and Indiana consistently has been top 5.
Nice.
From the CEOs, the decision makers who say, if you had to locate your business in a state, where would it be? So I think that's good. That's not to say there aren't challenges here. I think, infrastructure, been a lot of money invested in it, I-69, some others. I think we need, there are probably some additional infrastructure things that could happen. The other piece that doesn't get attention, but to me, it's rural economic development. To me, Indianapolis, and if you've been to Fort Wayne, or if you haven't been to Fort Wayne lately, it's unbelievable what's going on in their downtown. The amount of investment and things that I started my career there. I remember downtown very well, and those sidewalks certainly did roll up at 5 o'clock. Now you've got corporate folks, Star Financial, new headquarters down there. They've got a minor league ballpark. They've got, I think they're the smallest or one of the smallest cities in the country with the Ruth's Chris Steakhouse downtown. So they have this old General Electric plant, one time employed 14,000, 15,000 people. It's a live, work, play development now. And so they're doing great things. So you go to the cities, the metro areas, they're doing okay. But you get out into rural Indiana, and Indiana, much of Indiana is rural. It's not the case.
Yeah.
So tougher nut to crack. But I think how do you reach out, and how do you give support to these rural communities? Like where I grew up in Clinton, Indiana, used to have the coal mines over there. They've all dried up. A number of businesses in that area are gone. Fortunately, they've got an Elanco plant there, but the job opportunities are slim. So,
yeah. I mean, we do a lot of business in the rural areas throughout the Midwest. And when driving from any of one of our sites or through those markets, you can certainly see not just signs of the distant past, talking the 70s and 80s when there was manufacturing in some of these. And I don't mean a lot of manufacturing, but something that was in sort of an anchor employer for that community, for those who were non-farmers. Now they're empty.
Yep.
And you have to wonder, where are the folks that are still living in some of these towns that are not in agriculture? Where are they commuting to? And how do you may not be able to revive every small town, but how does the state attract businesses to expand, at least maybe sort of, instead of being regional, somehow find a balance between regional and local? Where's that middle ground so that people can live in their community still, but commute into a kind of more of a hotbed of industry and employment?
Right, which gets back to the whole education piece. And, coming out of high school, 4-year colleges and universities, amazing here in the state, public and private both, great institutions. But, I think the culture needs to embrace, and I think they're beginning to do it, embrace the 2-year associate degrees and certificates and those kinds of things that can get you something coming out of high school that instead of going to a fast food job, you're maybe going into some sort of manufacturing or advanced manufacturing type piece. The whole electrification of the auto industry that we're seeing billions of dollars going into Kokomo and New Carlisle and Terre Haute. They're breaking ground today on something over there. Those are opportunities. There's going to be disruption. The traditional manufacturing,
right,
is those skills are kind of going away, but new skills. So how do you get more kids engaged in careers and trained to do the jobs of the future?
Yeah. So here's a loaded question for you. 25 years, you've interviewed and spoken to a lot of different people, a lot of different companies, and not trying to play favorites, but if you had to say, okay, well, who are the top 3 or 5 stories that just really still stick out in your mind, who or what would those be?
One that I've told before, that it's not really a business story, but in terms of how senior executives carry themselves. I will always remember Steve Hilbert, Conseco, the big high-flying CEO, always so nice to me, very nice to me. And this would have been, well, in the late 90s, maybe. I can't remember when it would have been. But when he was very much high profile and in the news, and he gave us an interview. And you think about how executives build their brand, build their business. I will always remember the first time he came into our studio, everybody anticipated there was going to be this whole, posse's going to come in, and this whole big production. He was by himself, came in, and when he came into the studio, he didn't come over and say hello to me. He went to every person on the production crew and shook their hands and introduced himself.
Okay.
And that has always stuck with me, because when he left, everybody in that room thought he was great.
Yeah.
Just taking time, to interact with people, the people piece, of the equation. But, I mentioned John Mutz earlier. There's a guy who was a success in farming, in business, in politics, and gave so much of his life to Indiana. And he's one of my favorites over time. But the other thing, kind of just generally speaking, I mentioned Hilbert, but these national people like like Martha Stewart and Warren Buffett, and you think these people typically, I would say more times than not, they are nicer than nice. Martha Stewart came in for this conference. I got an interview with her, and we sat down, and she says, well, and we started talking about Long's Donuts. Her first stop was Long's Donuts coming into town. I'm like, Martha Stewart at Long's Donuts?
Was this pre or post Snoop Dogg relationship?
Oh, I think it was pre. I think
really?
It was actually pre, if I remember right. That's a good point.
I wonder why Long's Donuts would be her first stop.
Exactly. Warren Buffett. I remember he came here, Geico. It was a Berkshire Hathaway company. They had a big deal up in Carmel. And then we were told, you're just going to do a big group gangbang interview, up there. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get a one-on-one interview when this is going to happen. Yeah. And so I just went over to him, and he said, yeah, oh, sure. So he went over, we sat down, and then afterwards he took pictures. We took some pictures, and he pulled his wallet out, and he said, here, try to take it from me. And I'm grabbing it. So we have a picture of me trying to take Warren Buffett's wallet. But lots of those fun stories, and the stories that I like are going out and talking to entrepreneurs and people who have made things happen, especially in smaller communities around the state, because they do exist. Hoosier Bat Company up in Northwest Indiana, the guy there, he had a little restaurant outside of Culver, Indiana. George Steinbrenner would come down and visit his kids who were going to school at Culver. Yeah. And he would stop at this guy's restaurant. And Steinbrenner said, well, what do you want to do? He said, I just love a job in baseball. And so Steinbrenner gave him a job as a low-level scout in the Yankees organization. And this guy did that for a while. Then he got into making bats. So he created a bat company up in Northwest Indiana. Sells a lot of bats to youth and all that kind of. But he had about a dozen major leaguers who used his bats, and stories like that are always fun.
Yeah. What would you say? And talk to all these folks, and you mentioned Steve. What traits do they share? What traits do you see that are common in folks that are successful in business?
The ones that are, to me, that are really successful. Have an interest in people. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, when they're talking to somebody, they're not looking through them or looking over their head, thinking about, hey, how when's this conversation going to end? They genuinely care about what that person is telling them, and I think in terms of the executive worker relationship is so important, obviously. But I think that's a big thing. Being good listeners, and which I think is the trait of a best trait of an interviewer is just listening, and not, for that what might be that next question, but being good listeners, being people, if you will, and that whole, it's trite, but it is so true, I think, that if you care about your employees and they feel as though you care about them, you're going to get a better product.
Sure.
And the one and these days, just the customer service piece is seemingly has evaporated in so many industries. But those companies, Mike's Car Wash. I don't want to give a plug here, but I look at the Dom family in Fort Wayne, and they built that company with a focus on customer service. They would do. I think they sent employees down to the Disney Institute, for a car wash.
Right.
What are you talking? But you go in there, and now Crew and Mike's, you look at the customer service, top notch. And so those companies who, and you got to invest, there's a money piece of it, which sometimes makes it difficult. But those companies that believe in their people, treat their people right, and think about treating the customer right.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I have a Steve Hilbert story, and this is one that I can share.
Yeah.
Our mom used to have some frozen yogurt stores here in town, and one of them was in the Fashion Mall in the old food court that went above the street there. And I don't know if I was in high school or maybe the early part of college, but it was summertime or whatever. I was working there, and Steve and some people that he was with would oftentimes come in, and he wanted to get some yogurt. So we were chatting. Great tipper, by the way, which this is when you didn't really tip at fast food.
Yeah.
But he asked me what I was doing, and long story short, I I can't remember how it came up, but he said, to get to this position, you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. Right. The key thing is understanding what are the things you're not really good at and surrounding yourself with experts in those things. And so I think he said, accounting and finance was not really his thing. So he wanted to make sure that he had the smartest accounting and finance person on his team that could make up for that. I was like,
great. No, I could not agree more. And again, that's an executive who is, comfortable enough in his own skin to say, you know what, I don't know about that. Let me get somebody who does in there, and build a great team. Then treat them right. And what I really like to see, and there are lots of examples of it, but executives who give back from a mentoring standpoint, and sometimes that can be tough because it takes time and those kinds of things, but really helps to support young people in that journey that they're beginning on, because certainly we all have had people who have done that. I mean, I remember, and it can be a little thing. I remember the first time I covered the legislature from a station in Fort Wayne. And I had no idea what I was doing down here, and I put together a story, and I thought it was terrible. And I remember I got back, and, we got it on the air, and, made the big trip to Indy. And I remember the news director called me in, and he thought, and I don't know whether he was just being nice or not, but he said, that was really good. He kind of, talked me up, coached me up a little bit. And it's amazing how a little thing like that can click. It gives you the confidence to do that next thing.
Yeah.
And, it doesn't take much time to do that, to give people that support and that positive reinforcement. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you kind of a good segue into my last question for you, which was, of all the folks that you've been around and the fact that you have also taken the leap yourself to start your own thing, what advice would you give some of our folks to, how can they be industrious? How can they get uncomfortable sometimes, and then that's okay? Yeah,
great question, and don't mean to be trite with the answer, but the old Nike, just do it thing. Because I look back, I always had the utmost respect for entrepreneurs, for people who went out and did things, but I could never, ever envision myself as doing it. Ever. I said I could never do that. And as, this whole show thing kind of came about, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden I was doing it. And a lot of uncomfortable situations, areas that, another one in terms of uncomfortable, when I started out public speaking, now I do it all the time, but in the early days, I used to hate it, and I thought I was terrible at it. And it used to just drive me crazy. But doing it, getting out of your comfort zone, I think is the big thing, and believing in yourself. I mean, right. I know these are all trite things, but so true. I think 2008 recession. So we were about 10 years old as a show, and man, advertising was tough, and we had about 12, about a dozen employees. So I was not only responsible for my family, but 12 families. Sure. You guys know how that. I mean, that's a deal that's scary. Yeah. But you get through it. You sack up and you get it done. You bring people, do whatever you have to do. But I just think it's just doing it and not being afraid to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well said.
Fun. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, guys, very much. Congrats on the podcast, and thanks for listening to me ramble on here a bit.
No, that's fantastic.
Awesome.
Great.
And thank all you guys for tuning in today to this episode of the Industrious Podcast. Thanks again for joining us from wherever your podcast, or if you happen to be on the Assessa YouTube channel, thank you for tuning in. Until then, or until next time, I should say, don't forget, guys, be industrious.